Okay, so this is the last video in what I'm considering some of these core skills, and then we're going to move directly into React testing specifically. And I want to have some of this core functionality, core things down before we get in, because it makes a lot more sense. Well, and it makes a lot more sense when you're not, complicating it with extra things here. So I want to keep some of these things in their own sort of separate ideas. In this particular instance, what we're going to be talking about is mocking modules. I'm going to sort of rearrange some of this stuff here. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to name this file just add.js. Now, the code that goes in add.js is going to be the add code from app.js right here. We can just cut this out of here up top like this, and let's paste it in here. Let's save this. Next, we're going to make sure we need to import add from and then add.js. This is inside of app.js, just so our total function has the ability to use this correctly, okay? We can import add from add.js, okay? Now, next thing I want to do is, well, we could have an add.js test file where we can have a new file, add.test.js. And inside of this file, we can import add from, and then just /add, like this. Next, we're going to go ahead and grab our tests. We're going to remove this. I added this, this is dumb in practice. I added this little text here. So if you're looking at the code, just to let you know, yeah, you don't do this in real practice that much, just like this. Again, this is going to be a little bit more real world, but we're going to have to use our imaginations for a little bit of it here. We can see, can uncomment out this test stuff. Let's go ahead and move this unit test, which is just test add, into our add.test.js. I'm going to make sure my tests are in fact open so we can see if these are failing or running or whatever. And so add.test.js is now officially testing add, okay? And then next thing we're going to do is head to app.test.js, and we're going to uncomment out this test, okay? You can see we're getting a failed test. Let's go ahead and fix this. You can see this just function value must be a mock function or a spy. So here's one of the reasons why we would have used a mock function is that we cannot call this has been called sort of stuff. We can't call this on a normal function. Reason being is because, well, the spy function that we mentioned, it's a spy or a mock or fake function, is sort of spying on the function, as in it's reporting things like how many times it was clicked, which is one of the reasons why it's called a spy, right? You'll notice when I get rid of that sort of spying on stuff, it actually, the tests all pass because we're just worried about the values, okay? And right now, this is no big deal. This is a unit test. This add function is doing everything that it needs to be doing. It's adding two numbers, and all the tests are passing. But let's quickly pretend here. I'm in app.test.js where we're testing our total function, and this function's passing. And it's passing, and it's going to pass even if we change these values, let's say 30. Okay, this is going to pass regardless because this is adding two numbers and then adding a $sign. That's pretty great. Because this is all great, but let's say we wanted to test the implementation of total specifically. And I am an advocate for mostly doing integration tests because if your stuff doesn't work together, then, well, it doesn't work, right? But there are some instances where you have these external libraries that are going off and doing things, and the return value is always going to be the same, right? So let's briefly just put on our imagination hats and imagine that add.js is a function that goes off and hits an API for whatever reason and just returns a number. That's it, right? So as an add.js is not something internal to this project that we can test specifically, and we don't necessarily want it to go off and do those API calls because that's going to take a bunch of time. We just want to expect that it's going to return the right data. Well, this is where things get interesting. Because what we want to do is we want to check add, and we want to make add into a mock function. Well, from inside of total, how do we do that? Because we're testing the total component here, right? We're testing total, and we don't see the word add anywhere in here. So even if we were to do something like const add is equal to jest.fn, and this is just going to be a function that returns, let's just have it return 10 or something like that. If we save this, you can see our test still pass because total is not using this jest function. It doesn't care about this jest function. It's this add is not being used at all. It's just simply running total. Then total is going off and doing its own thing where it imports add from add and then does its total. What we need to do is we need to mock this import. And that's kind of an interesting concept. What we're going to be doing is mocking the import itself. So we're mocking the dependency, and then we're going to define that dependency as a function. So the first thing we need to actually do is import add from wherever it's being imported from. And in this case, it's ./add, okay? So first thing we do is import this. And then the next thing we do is we run if we save this, we're gonna get an error saying it was a duplicate function, okay? So let's go ahead and get rid of that. But we're gonna go ahead and do a jest.mock. And this is going to take in a path where we can do ./add. So we're saying, hey, we're mocking this path. And the thing that we're going to mock inside of here is a comma and then an arrow function. Well, actually, let me hold off on this part here. Let me just save this. And this is actually something interesting because now our tests will still run, but you'll see that they're going to fail. Okay, so if we comment out this line, test pass. We add in this line, the tests fail. But more importantly, the function actually runs. It just runs with the value of undefined. So right now what we've done is saying, hey, add exists as a function, but it returns nothing, okay? It just returns undefined. And therefore our tests still run, but the value of the add function comes back as undefined, so we get $undefined. Now this is super interesting to me and is really handy in situations where you just have one thing coming in and you don't necessarily care if it's been like what the output is. Like if I don't care what the to be values here is, I remember I could do that expect, and this is really fun because we're actually spying into the total function, into a fake add function, and we could expect add dot to have been called one time after at least we run this one time. You can see it is failing because of this. Let's go ahead and remove this expect and just do a total 2, 5, whatever. Okay, you can see the first test passes. If we get rid of this one, we get a lot of green here, okay? So what's interesting about this is it's setting up sort of a mock spy of an internal dependency to total. We're not using add anywhere in here. Okay, so if this seems foggy, don't worry about it. We're going to keep this going here. What we next want to do is say, hey, well, actually, let's leave this to have been called one time, and then we can actually have another one to have been called 2 times, like this. There we go. Just so we can have these in here, right? The next thing we want to do is define the return values for add. But since add is, well, there's subdependencies within add here, what we need to do is have a callback, which is a function that returns an object. And here we can define the individual dependencies. And we can say add. And now we're going to have this value be a jest.fn, which is what we saw before in the last video. And this is just going to be a simple function that returns something like 25. And now we have something a little bit more interesting. You can't really necessarily tell unless you dive into it, but the first expect passed, as in it expected the total to be returned as $25, and it was. And we also expected it to be called one time, and it was. Now, the next thing that we didn't expect was, well, we expected if we called it with 5 and 25 to return 30, okay? Now, again, there's not a ton of times in the real world you want to do this, but this is a good opportunity to show you some interesting features in Jest. What we can do is we can say add, as in the add function that we mocked. We want to say add mock implementation. And remember, a mock function is just this fake version of the function that you're running when you don't have access to the real one, or you don't want to have access to the real one. And we could say, well, the new mock implementation of this thing, after it's been run, well, this time it's actually gonna return 30. And then now all of our tests pass. So what we're doing here, let's go over this because this stuff is super weird. And again, this is stuff you're gonna run into in React when you have external dependencies and functions that you're running and you want or cannot access the real version, so you create a fake function. So the very first thing we did is we actually imported the dependency. Then we used just mock to mock the location of the dependency. And we used this arrow function returning an object thing to say, hey, the thing inside, right, the module add, well, add is just going to be a fake function that returns 25. Again, maybe you had an API call that's going off and doing some stuff and returning a value. And this way we can fake that because, well, you don't want to test someone else's API. That's not necessarily a good practice, right? You want to test your code, and you're going to assume that, well, PayPal or whoever it is testing their own API, and that the values that you're going to get back from that API are always going to be the same. Okay, so now at this point, we can then run our test for total where we expect that, well, if we add two numbers together, it's going to come out with 25. And again, we can also check in and spy on this function to see that, well, the internal add function inside of total, right? Total runs add. We can see that add inside of total ran once. And we can see that, the mock implementation here, we modified the value to 30, and now when we expect the value to be 30, we can see that add has been called again. Now everything from line 17 to line 14, this is redundant. Okay, I don't know, is that how you spell redundant? I guess so. This is redundant, as in a real testing environment, there's not too many times where you're going to be doing this exactly like this, because this right here is testing the exact same functionality as this above it. Whereas when we did our add test in, add.test.js, when we did our add test, it made sense because we wanted to make sure at least two different values worked. But if add itself is being tested, we don't need to do all these separate tests with separate numbers for these. But this is a good opportunity to show you things like creating a mocked dependency. We have our individual module here, and we were able to spy on that. We were able to change what that's returning, and we were able to use it as a dependency of another function. This is all super cool stuff in case you're wondering, and you may not necessarily see the value of it outside of the context of a real application. But once again, these are some core skills that I strongly believe you need to have going into this. We've now learned a lot of jargony words, right? We've learned what an assertion is, right? This is an assertion. We're asserting something to be true or a value, right? We also learned what a spy is. We have a fake function that is allowing us to spy to see if this function was called. We also learned the word mock, which is just basically some fake stuff. And there's going to be some testing purists who get up in arms about the definitions between mock, spies, dummies, fakes, and a whole bunch of stupid stuff like that. In my opinion, you'll see this word mock getting thrown around all the time to just represent fake stuff. A mock function, fake function. A mock object, fake data, or fake object of data. Okay? And some of this stuff is going to come in way, way, way handy once we get into React. And we start mocking up some data, and we start mocking up some functions, some internal methods, and we start to get this stuff going. So what we're going to be doing next is getting React going with this thing. We're going to get React set up in a project, and we're going to do so with Create React App. Now, the reason why I'm using Create React App for this, like always, is because it gives you a great starting off point, but it also gives you Jest pre-installed. Okay, so this was a really nice little testing environment I built here, but now that we're getting into some real React stuff, it's going to be handy to start with a React site. So if you haven't used Create React App before, we're going to be using that to get started. Don't worry, we'll make it nice and easy, and you're going to see exactly how testing in React works. Now, we're going to be using some very specific libraries for this series. One is React Testing Library, which I believe is an excellent library. I'm going to talk about my decision for that. So as always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.